Welcome to the Strong Roots podcast. It's all about interviewing everyday, ordinary Christians who have strong roots of faith and then applying it to our own lives. Whether you are seeking, whether you're new to faith, or maybe you've been following Jesus for a really long time, come grow strong roots with us.
Hey, Strong Roots. We've got an exciting conversation today about idolatry of kids, and I'm interviewing Kristin.
Yes, you are.
I'm excited to be here. And Kristin, can you give us a definition? What does it mean to idolize your kids?
Okay. And I'd love for you to add to this, but I think idolizing your kids means you're putting your worth and your identity in your kids' success, in your kids in general, like where I am putting them almost in the place of God.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to rearrange my schedule for my kids. Everything in my life is going to revolve around my children.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, I don't think it's just rooting your success in your kids. It's just your whole life is built around making them happy.
Absolutely.
Would be the idolatry of kids. And like examples, I hear parents all the time say things like, I'm going to let my kids decide. I'm going to let my kids decide. You know, like I really want my kids to choose church and I was forced to do it and whatever else. And it's like, hey, that's a screw up of the authority structure.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we're not here to let our kids decide. We're here to lead our kids to Christ.
Right.
You know, and lead our kids to godliness in every area of their life. But what percent of moms and dads would you say in your interactions who are parents are struggling right now with idolatry of kids?
And this is just a Kristin Hill
Anecdote. Statistic, though.
80%.
Yeah.
Would you
Super
agree?
common. Yeah, but I think putting that out there, saying, okay, 8 out of 10 are dealing with this.
Yep.
We'll reduce that to 4 out of 5.
Okay, I like it.
Because I can do that.
Pastor.
But I think that it's because so many people are struggling with it, it's okay for you to admit that you struggle with it.
Absolutely.
And I think I just want to put that out there because a lot of us are like, well, I hope I don't struggle with that. It's like, well, most people do.
Most likely you do.
Yeah, yeah. How does that hurt your kids?
Oh, it hurts them. I mean, it hurts them. I want to say completely. That's not the word, but like it hurts them so much when I idolize them because you're putting them in a place that they're never meant for and they can't live up to.
Yeah.
And that's such a stressful life to be put on a pedestal and for me to revolve around them. I think it actually leads to insecurity, to performance issues, to self-worship. They think like I am worth worshiping also, which is going to hinder their relationship with Christ ultimately.
Yep.
So I think it's
What other relationships does it hurt?
your marriage.
Yep.
Like when I put the kids before God, then I'm definitely putting them before you. And something that I really loved, John has a gift of visualizing things and seeing things. And this is not every marriage, but something that I really value now in hindsight is you being like, hey, the kids aren't going to sleep in our bed. That's something that I just want to protect. Cause like, I feel like I'm the type that'd be like, we're sleeping together, hog pile every night. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I just feel that's just one example, but I feel like you put some really healthy boundaries in our lives before we even had kids and said like, this is how I want it to look.
Yeah. And I would say it's still, you don't let the kids sleep with us at night.
Right.
But I would say there's still tension. I don't like the kids in our bed.
Right.
Like they can occasionally come into our bedroom, but I don't even like that. Like that's our space.
Right.
That's our space. And that's something that I've continually had to fight for because, our marriage comes before our kids, right? Because they're going to move out. But there's another relationship that gets hurt through idolatry of your kids, and it's your relationship with your kids.
Right.
What happens when you see a mother or father idolize their kids when the kids grow up? What happens?
I think it leads to disappointment. The parents are so disappointed and they almost have resentment to their kids because there were strings attached. Like I revolve my world around you and now the fact that you don't want to be a part of my life in the way that I think you should, or your world doesn't revolve around me now that I'm older.
Yep.
It leads to estranged relationships.
Totally.
And it's on repeat. I feel like I just see it over and over and over again. And I think, I don't know if you want to go somewhere else, but can I go back to the marriage thing really quick? I was having a great conversation with my sister the other day, and we were just talking about the struggle of idolizing our kids in our own lives that we shared, and it was not having our husbands back when they make a call. Like, I think for me personally, one of the areas that I struggle idolizing our kids in general is in discipline and choosing to put their needs before maybe what God would like for them, but ultimately what you are pointing them to. And I have hurt our relationship with our kids, my relationship with you, and my relationship with God when I undermine your authority in front of the kids. And I would say that's the number one area that I struggle in this topic is when you're making a call, not wanting to be like, oh, but you don't know the context or the, you know, dad, blah, 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 blah. And it is so hurtful. Like in all those areas.
So hurtful. I would say that's the biggest way that you've hurt me over the last year has been, you know, trying to intervene when I'm trying to discipline our kids.
Absolutely.
Now, you know, you have lovingly told me after the fact, hey, one way you could, you know, Kristin will say she's in the wrong, which it takes a great deal of humility. I'm grateful for that when you've done that. You know, I've confronted you and you've owned it. But you said, hey, John, can you coordinate your discipline with me?
Yeah.
And so I don't always do it, but now a lot of times I'll say, hey, you know, even in front of the kids, I'll say, hey, I'm thinking about giving, you know, one of our kids, Hermione, a consequence for this thing. Here's what I'm thinking. And she'll hear us talking about it. And then I'll say, is there any context that I'm missing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you'll say, oh, there's some context. You'll say there's whatever. And then a lot of times I think a tension that we've had is I believe that the kids can do more earlier.
Oh, I love that.
Than you believe.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've had to come to you. And here's the thing, and this is such a big deal, is because Kristin is so cognizant of her tendency to worship our kids, you said, hey, I don't necessarily see it the way you see it, but I'm going to submit to you. Yeah. And you will. And many times, sometimes I've been wrong. Sometimes I've done it too early, but many times, you know, we have found, oh, wow, like our kids can do laundry. Our kids can clean the house. Our kids are doing better with an earlier structured bedtime.
Right.
You know, and that the bedtime's probably huge tension, right? Because it's always like, I say bedtime, you know, for our older girls is, you know, 8:40 at the latest. Yeah. And she's like, we start hugs and kisses and conversations and bargaining at 8:40. They're not in bed until 9. And it's like, hey, they need a minimum 10 hours of sleep, right? According to all the data.
Right.
And they're getting 9.5. What are we doing?
But I think that is I think a lot of men, it is a God-given gift for most men to be able to push kids to do things that they're made to do. And I think as the wife, as the mom, we have to die to ourselves in order to, a lot of times, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, easy peasy. And sometimes I'm like, I don't think they can. But I got to trust Jesus in you and the mantle that God's placed on you to lead them in that way. And really quick, something I want to just touch on, I think something that has helped our kids know that we don't worship them and idolize them is when we have screwed up. But John has screwed up undermining me. I have screwed up more undermining him publicly. We go back to the kids and say, hey, I was in the wrong. I should not have undermined your father. That was disrespectful. And like, will you forgive me?
Right.
And never have our kids been like, oh, mom, they're always like, yeah, I forgive you. Like they know.
They don't like that.
It's sin. They know idolizing them is sin.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's been a really healthy practice because then I'm honoring you and making it right.
Yeah.
In front of them and in front of God.
And I think they really do appreciate it because it assures them, you know, in their hearts and souls, they know what the hierarchy should be. Yep. And they ultimately have come to realize that actually feels better to have it, you know, God, then our marriage, and then them third. And we tell them often, hey, I want you to know that I love your mom more than I love you guys. Yep. You know, and they know. And we tell them, and at first, you know, oh, that hurts so much. But now I think they know that home's a safe place, and they know the hierarchy. And sometimes when they try and play, you know, us off each other, you know, we let them know, hey, I love your mom more than I love you.
Well, and we even say, like, you're not going to be here forever. Like, you're going to go, God has a purpose for you, but you're going to get married. You're going to start your family or start your career or do whatever God's going to call you to. And it's just going to be us. Like God has this design because when we need to love each other more than the kids in order for us to love them best.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I think, every time we choose our kids over God or we choose our kids over our spouse, you know, with that worshiping of kids, the ones who suffer the most is them.
Yeah.
And your long-term relationships with them. And I think that's such a, you know, we have seen that with so many different marriages, so many different relationships. And then here's the other thing that I have watched is particularly with daughters who have a great relationship with their parents, when you idolize your kids and then your kids get married, they've chosen who they've chosen.
Yep.
And it's your job to boost that relationship and help that child choose their new marriage ahead of you.
Yep.
And that's another place, if you want to idolize your kids, I had some really good friends growing up, and they just had the best dad. He was the best. And, he had some girls, and he loved his daughter so well. All 3 of his girls struggle in their marriages because they still love their dad so much. And I just think, what a cost. He's not going to be there for the last third of their life, and he's not the primary man in their life.
Right.
And that's a perfect way that I see, adult men and women idolizing their kids ahead of godliness. And everybody suffers. Their grandkids suffer.
Yep.
Their daughters are suffering, or their sons in other circumstances, right? Where, you love your son and don't release him into the marriage.
And I feel like every family has its own unique dynamics, our own unique struggles. But I feel like for all my parents' successes and failures, my parents did not idolize them. They put their marriage first. Even just a recent example that I felt like it was a little tug. Like, I want to be this when my kids are older. My sister had passed away, and I called my mom to talk about, this is when I'm going to leave. This is to go to Minnesota. This is when I come home. She wept tears of joy because she had no expectation. She's like, I wasn't even expecting you to come home. And she wouldn't have been mad. I want to make it clear. She would have been happy that I didn't come home. She is so
just that you called
and that I was coming home. She was so happy, but she had no expectation or strings attached. It's your sister. You need to come home.
Yep.
This is your right. And I logged that away, and I was like, she just believes that I am living on a mission for God here. And she supported what God is doing in my life here, that there was no strings. And I was like, I want to be a mom like that.
And how much more did it mean then? How much more joy did she have?
Yes.
Instead of, having the expectation you come home, which would just be a net neutral.
Right.
You
should have.
Good. You're doing what you should have did.
Yeah.
She was grateful.
Right.
You came home, and she was able to enjoy that gift so much more. It was a blessing to her, right?
And I think that is in all areas. When we don't idolize
With
our kids.
Yes.
Everything is a blessing. You preach a great sermon a while.
Expectations versus desires. Yeah.
Yep. So we can have desires, but we shouldn't put expectations on our kid.
Because desires you get grateful for. Expectations is just good. It's what I deserve. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Great. I have been watching an idolatry of kids destroy kids' education. Can you talk a little bit about that? How at school, it's easy to idolize our kids versus prepare our kids to serve God. You want to talk about what you've seen with that and the destructive tendencies that brings?
I feel like when we idolize our kids, we're saying my kid can do no wrong. A teacher will bring a problem or have disciplined the kids in school, and they're going to us to support them and have their back. And when we idolize our kids, we're saying, how dare you say my kid did something wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And again, how destructive is that to the child? They're not going to be able to, how are we expecting them to believe God is their authority when we're tearing down the authorities that are in their everyday life? And let's be honest, it can be hard. When you always say there's his side, her side, and the truth. And you hear your kid's side, you hear the teacher's side. But I think as parents, we are trusting, in the Bible, it says that God has placed every authority here on earth. I'm probably paraphrasing that verse. But we have to trust that God put that teacher in their lives. And if there is something to confront, it's not my job to confront the teacher. It's my job to equip my child to go and confront the teacher. I'm not fighting their battles. We only have so much time with our kids. And if there is something that they see that the teacher doesn't see, as parents, I feel like it's our job to tell them, you need to go to the teacher and confront them and tell them about them. But then you're going to respect whatever their decision is or whatever their insight is.
And I think another aspect of this that you brought up before that you didn't bring up in that answer was when we worship our kids, especially at school, our end goal is their happiness and glory. Right? And so you always know that you're idolizing your kid if your kid is unhappy at school or not being glorified at school, you get super offended and upset, right?
Right.
But if your goal is their holiness,
Right.
as a parent, then all trials are good.
Right.
Right. And so like the other day, this is like a couple years ago,
Right.
one of our kids was studying for this math competition, right? For an Asian guy, that's a really big deal. And they met the qualifications to be a part of the team, studied hard, worked for it, and they didn't get to be on the team. And I got super offended. I got super upset, right? Because I was idolizing that aspect of one of my children's lives. And, I was super upset. I was ready to just, raise up heaven. I was going to talk to teachers, going to do all this stuff. And you told me, John, praise God that our child got to face something that was unfair.
Right.
Right? Because we want them to learn to receive unfairness and give grace back, because that's what this child is receiving from Jesus.
Absolutely.
Right? And all trials are good. And I just thought, wow, like how did I worship my kids so quickly? As a pastor, as a Christian, like how did I take such deep offense to this, to teachers unfairly moving the goalposts? Who cares? All trials are good.
Right.
And that teacher, I eventually got more sides of the story, and that teacher was doing what they thought was best. I still don't agree with it, but who cares?
Right.
All trials are good. And what an awesome opportunity to teach my child to receive something that was unfair. Try really hard and say, it wasn't about getting the prize. It was just because God made me, and I'm here to glorify him and bring my best every day. Oh, wow. And I was so thankful for that.
Yeah.
Because I had slipped into worshiping my child, and my end goal was happiness and their glory rather than their holiness for the glory of God.
Absolutely. And I think it can be as simple as we've had kids like, why would God give me this teacher? My teacher is so mean. And it's
Yeah. Good.
That's what we say. Like, you are going to have leaders in your life that you have a hard time
Right.
following and
Yeah.
working for. And what a great example and
Yeah.
time for you to be able to figure out how to work with somebody that you have a hard time getting along with. Like,
Yeah.
this is going to be, it's not going to stop when you get older.
Right.
And like, how are you going to glorify God with a leader that you really struggle with?
Oh, totally. And again, when you want to go in there and mama bear or papa bear it up, it's because your goal is your child's happiness
Yep.
and your child's glory ahead of the glory of God and their holiness, right? And I just think all the time, it's like, oh, I would never idolize my kids. I'm not one of those people. But as soon as I do that, I just recognize, man, I idolize my kids all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. When I see something be unfair, when I see them be hurt, when I see whatever, and it's like, nope. Everything in this fallen world is an opportunity for my kids to be refined. I mean, do I really believe that all trials are good? And I want to train my children to stand in the shadow of a bloodstained cross and say, Jesus, your grace is sufficient for me, and your power is made perfect in my weakness. Like that's that, right? Is that the end goal for our kids or not?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's easy on this side, to say it like in the middle of a podcast in a nicely
Yeah.
manicured room. Oh yeah, that's what I want. But in the moment,
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the rage that you felt
When
your kid's happiness and glory is threatened.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's some definite battles and storms going on in my heart.
Yeah.
But I have to. It's not a surprise to God.
Oh yeah. Which between the two of us, who struggles more?
You.
Oh yeah. Kristin is like, yeah, good. Let him suffer. One of our kids, like a boy was, pulling her hair and throwing stuff at her and being really mean. And I was like, I am going to kill that boy. I'm so mad. I'm so upset. How dare he? And Kristin was like, no, all trials are good.
Yeah.
She's fine. So,
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
One last little comment I want to make is I think something that's been beneficial to keep this from being more of an idol in our, I mean, we're trying to smash it every day, is allowing each other to speak into each other's lives. It hurts when John calls me out. Like, let's just be real. I'm sure when I call you, sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of times I'm like, ow.
Yeah.
Like, that hurts. But I need other people in my life.
You trust me enough to receive the feedback.
But I think there's a lack of trust in a lot of relationships that, like, even if you don't trust someone, you need to be able to, like, let's say some random person on the side of the street calls me out on something I'm doing as a mom. Is there truth to it? Is God using that stranger on the street? Is God using my husband? Is God using my mother-in-law to help make me a better mom or father and smash the idol of idolizing my kids? And I think God is trying to get our attention all the time through lots of different things, whether it's a podcast or people in our lives. And I want to call us to actually not just brush it aside, but to actually think, is there truth in that? Because I don't you hear it all the time?
Oh, this is such a huge, I think, hindrance. Like God gives us these kids, and so often, the parting shot I want to give.
Yes,
okay?
I'm excited.
'Cause you know, turn it back to me and ask a question. I've talked plenty. I've prognosticated on this, but I think that, you know, in addition, so a great barometer of, you know, are you idolizing your kids is, you know, do I get upset when their happiness and glory are threatened? Or do I see it as an opportunity to refine their holiness and
good.
glorify God, right? But the second one is, am I building my schedule and my life around my kids? And I just think that is such a big thing. And we said before we had kids, we said, hey, we are going to continue. Our life's purpose is to glorify God,
Right.
not to give our kids a great childhood,
Yep.
right? And in glorifying God, our kids are going to have a great childhood.
Yep.
Might not be what everybody else says, but this has been a big challenge for us, right? Because one of our kids in particular is super athletic,
Yeah.
right? And that doesn't mean that she can't do sports. Doesn't mean that she can't do those things. But the temptation, I didn't think it would be so great because I see her. I'm like, man, she could be great. She could do all these things. You know, I mean, look at her. She's tenacious. She's a killer. She's got a killer instinct, hand-eye coordinated, one-handed catches, all these stuff, killing me in cornhole, all these things. But I say, no, our life is to glorify God,
Yep.
not to give our kids a great childhood.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, always checking, you know, is the totality of my efforts more weighted towards giving my kids a good childhood than it is towards simply glorifying God?
Right.
And when I see that, I'm like, oh man, there's a problem. So anyway,
That's
lots
good.
of food for thought. Parents, I'm so thankful that you've joined us for this one. I hope
Yeah.
you've been blessed by it. I hope you have meaningful discussions. And children are a gift from God. It's our job to point them to God.
Amen.
And they're not ours or His. But thank you guys. Hope you have a great day. Peace.
Bye.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Strong Roots podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure to check us out on all our other social media platforms. And I want to let you know that I am personally praying that your roots stay strong.